Hello and welcome. My name is Piers. I am the CEO of Radix DLT, and today we are doing another roundtable. Unbelievably, been a month since our last one, and today we have got with us some great people. Matt, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go around clockwise.
Sure. I'm Matt Hine. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Radix DLT.
I'm Russell Harvey. I'm CTO at Radix DLT.
And I'm Adam Simmons, Chief Strategy Officer at Radix DLT.
So we've got some great questions from the community, which we'll be going through in order. Adam, if you don't mind, just sort of comparing the questions, and then we'll jump in and answer as we see fit.
Sounds good. So to kick off, one of the first questions and themes that came up when we look for questions for the roundtable is, what does Radix look for when we're considering partnerships, and what role do they have in Radix's marketing strategy? So Piers, do you want to kick off with that?
Sure. So partnerships are an interesting one. Like, you have lots of different tiers of partnerships you can make with a public ledger. Some are sort of like I would call quite skin deep, and others are sort of much more strategic in how they add value to the ecosystem. And just from a broader strategy, if you want to be building value over time in your ecosystem, it does make a lot of sense if you're going to be putting like sort of resource in terms of sales and marketing into building partnerships, that those partnerships really add value to the ecosystem, bring either information onto the ledger, add functionality that people want, add liquidity that people want. There are lots of different ways in which you can add value on top of a ledger. But one of the first things that any sort of decent partner really wants to see is, well, how do I build against this ledger? Because from the point of view of being sort of authentic to my own community, as someone who's thinking about building on sort of another layer one, I want to make commitments that I believe that can be maintained. So, the a lot of these conversations end up going to, this is really cool. We're really excited about the community. We're really excited about what this opportunity can represent for our product or service or layer or application. But how do you build? Like, show me some developer documentation. So Olympia is a very simple network. It was designed to build decentralization of the staking, decentralization of the security, and give people an opportunity to start testing our security model, our transaction model, and all this kind of stuff. It also tests the Radix engine, which is a bit more sort of low level, but that's very helpful for us to understand something that's going to be really important for defining Radix engine v2, etc. But it doesn't really tell you how to build against the ledger if you want to build something complicated, or if you want to build anything beyond sort of simple tokens. So sort of partnerships and strategic discussions are possible at this stage, but they can become a lot easier when you get to Alexandria, because post Alexandria, that's when scrypto comes out, and scrypto really tells people how they build in the Radix environment and can start testing that and actually start making real commitments to Radix and working out what a time commitment on their engineering team, etc., would look like. So right now, there's obviously lots of interesting conversations that are going on. I've had loads of great conversations as a result of GoodFi and so the various panels and things like that I've been on, and the DeFi download, and all of these are great like sort of starting points. But really, that doesn't get serious until after Alexandria, and actually a little bit after Alexandria, not immediately after Alexandria, because Alexandria is the first release of scrypto. It's a new language. It needs some time to bed in. And so that's when we start really strategically thinking about it, sort of after Alexandria. That's when partnerships really come into play.
Right. And anybody thinking about this as a business is going to want to know, when can we actually launch, which means they need a high confidence commitment on when Babylon's going to launch,
Right.
what features are going to be available. Then that's when it really becomes a business decision they can make.
Right, exactly. So there's like this first period of launching the language, and then there's this next period of like, well, when are we planning out, like, when does this happen from the company that's thinking about, or the team that's thinking about building on Radix. So I'd say that these really start in earnest once we firstly have the language out, and secondly have like a good high commitment time frame on Babylon. And a role in marketing strategy, yeah, like it's a huge thing. But like the partnerships are often this sort of like I think there's sort of two ways of doing partnerships, and the partnerships that really I want to bring up the second concept of like championing your own ecosystem. And I think a lot of people think about like stealing from other people's ecosystems a lot. Like, oh, how do we get Aave to come and be on Radix and sort of duplicate and like pull some of the liquidity that's on Ethereum? How do we get all of these other protocols? But actually, what really does create better ecosystems and more enthusiasm in your community is championing things that come from your own community. So, like, Avalanche has got some great examples of this. Yes, they've brought some applications across, but the ones that are doing really well are things like Trader Joe's and stuff like that were built out of the Avalanche ecosystem, and the same on Binance as well. Like, yes, PancakeSwap is a direct copy of Uniswap, but it is its own team, and it is a team that's sort of committed to the Binance ecosystem. And so you're going to see similar things again with Radix, where we start off really like focusing on how we build that first nugget, that first like sort of group of developers who are really keen and really excited about what scrypto represents and that unfair advantage that it represents, and want to be the first people to build on the Radix ecosystem. And those are the people that we should really be championing at the start. Yes, it matters to get brand names across, but like honestly, to keep that long-term momentum of your community, of that long-term momentum of your ecosystem, your own community, championing your own community is super important. That will be a big part of our marketing strategy as well. Just championing people who come and build on Radix, because we want Radix to be a platform for other people's success, and to help do that, we will be doing everything we can to make the people who build on Radix successful.
Yeah, I think if you talk to people in the crypto ecosystem for a long time, I think like, people don't tend to talk about this publicly, but there's a lot of cynicism about partnerships in the crypto space. Like, you talk to people, it's sort of like there's kind of this, it's something that everyone has to do, but there are all these super low value partnerships that get announced. It's sort of like, all right, we're just going to get a bunch of logos up there, and it's one of those things where like it's not something we think is unimportant. Like, you have to sort of demonstrate that you're part of an ecosystem. But
yeah,
I think people are starting to kind of burn out on this notion of partnerships that don't really demonstrate that the platform is being adopted and is useful. It's just kind of service level stuff.
Right, but I am so excited about what you can do with scrypto.
Yeah.
Right, it's so amazing how quickly you can build the same functionality as in the Ethereum ecosystem. And like, I want to encourage developers to go and entrepreneurs to go and like just go and re-implement stuff in scrypto and see how incredible it is, and like get the bug and want to build on Radix.
Right.
And I think that's way more valuable.
Exactly. Yelling about that, people who have come to the tools and be like, oh my God, I'm so excited about this that I want to build something and I want to launch it on the platform. Like, that's the stuff that needs to be going front and center because it's meaningful.
Right.
Yeah.
It also feeds in.
Investment period of.
It feeds into the long-term strategy as well. Like, when you're looking at building successful communities, it's not only building up people who may come and do things, but actually showing that full success cycle. So people who come in at Alexandria and do the first bits of building, seeing their success, championing their success, brings other people in going, oh, well, I want to follow that same path. And it doesn't just stop there. That's really the start of it. And what we're building at the moment with sort of bringing in an ecosystem lead is how do we make that process a entire full partnership cycle? So that's from like initial kind of, oh, I want to try this, I want to get involved, oh, I've built something, it's launched, it's now working successfully, it's now growing. And if you look in pretty much any platform business in the world, that's what happens. You have champion users who have come in early and go through that entire cycle. And the best partnerships programs have that entire cycle planned out rather than just being skin deep initially.
Mm-hmm, right.
Which means this, like, I think that this is going to happen a little slower than people want initially, and then happen very, like, it's going to gather momentum if we get it right. That pace, that tempo that is set, will become very exciting. But you got to get the starting point right, and like making sure you're championing the right people is crucial to that. What were you going to say, Russell? Sorry.
Just that. What we found internally on trying scrypto with the team is, especially for folks that do have a Solidity development background, there's quite a mental shift to using resources instead of, oh, I have like an ERC20 token in a smart contract, to doing asset-oriented programming. There's going to be this period of people just figuring out, oh, this is how we can implement this, and this is a cleaner design. you have to go through this process of it's not going to work the same way it did on Ethereum. It's going to work differently. There's going to be new things possible.
Yeah,
Right.
you have to have people that are taking you seriously to get to that point. They've got to spend a little bit of engineering effort to like make the investment to look at that, and then they come out of that with a very positive impression for what we found, and that becomes a potentially very committed, valuable partnership. But they have to get over that hump.
Right. And like this does actually come into our sort of like strategy of long-term strategic advantage, right? Like you can't copy pasta across from Ethereum. However, if you take the time to learn the language and understand how you build in this new asset orientated approach, like the speed at which you can build and the complexity of what you can build and the intuitiveness of what you can build is just so much greater. But you have to have people who are willing to take that time to go up the learning curve. So again, like it's really important to make sure that you're championing your own community and that you're pushing them forwards and that they feel heard and seen and involved, because that's where you're going to get like the next wave of innovation. We think that Radix is going to be where the next wave of DeFi is going to be built, because once people understand these tools, they're just going to be able to do so much more than they can on Ethereum, just by dint of how easy it is to build with crypto. So yeah, and like there's an extra part to this question, which is would Radix ever look at take on private networks? And like Russell and Matt can certainly talk with far more authority about the actual process of selling private networks to people. But like my 2 cents on this is, I think that you have to choose philosophically and strategically where you're looking at, and like our view is public networks are going to eat the world. Like the ability to have a single piece of infrastructure that has instant composability and the programmability that is compatible with each other is absolutely the way it's going to go. And actually, even more than that, subnetworks are not the way to go. So like if you have incompatible VMs, that might seem to be like a really attractive way, or have this quasi public private thing that might seem to be a really good way, but you lose the compatibility with other applications that makes this so powerful. So it's not just Radix isn't going to do private networks, which it's not going to. Like, it's open source. If people want to use it for private network, fine. But it's not even going to be actively supporting other virtual machines. It's focused on scrypto and the Radix engine as this way of creating compatibility between financial applications, which is crucial to creating sort of a global financial ecosystem that is instantly compatible with each other. But yeah, Radix, Matt, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience of implementing private networks.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I think it's part of the picture, but I mean, there's a couple of directions you can think about it. I mean, in terms of the idea of us spending time trying to support those and find partnerships for people that want to build private networks and using Radix technology. I mean, what Russ and I found doing, we consulted in this space for a number of years, and it eats an enormous amount of time. And what we've found is in the output, all of the entities that are looking at private networks are not, to be honest, not really taking it seriously. They're very interested in sort of like checking a box on their management level to-do list of saying, yes, we've investigated blockchain technology, and we can now tell our shareholders that we investigated blockchain technology, but it isn't really solving a problem that they see as painful right now. And to be honest, like, they see public networks coming and they can kind of vaguely understand, well, this maybe threatens our business model and maybe we should be using blockchain to regain that competitive advantage. But for the most part, they're not going to do anything for the next few years until that threat becomes real and practical and they're actually suffering a problem. And then they're just going to start trying to acquire companies that can help them solve the problem. They're not going to rebuild their systems around this. I mean, so it's, you will spend a lot of time, and in the end, you won't really get someone using Radix technology. You're just going to get someone that's sort of using you to look good in the marketplace. So in terms, we're really focused on trying to solve where the real problems are, and we think that those problems get solved in public networks first, because that's where you get the new innovators coming in that aren't bound to the way traditional systems have been built in the past, that are going to build competitive things that are going to become a threat to those big companies down the road. But it's like you got to go where the innovators are first. You can't go to the big companies because they cannot be innovative.
Ross, did you have anything to add?
I think the only other thing I'd say is, if this was the time, if this was, the big opportunity was to be looking at private deployments, people would be knocking on the door already all over the place, and they're just not.
Yep.
It's much more, the ones that are interested in is that it's a check the box activity. It's, oh, okay, we looked at it, or maybe there's some interesting thing we can do with the supply chain, and it's only folks that are in a position of power to compel the people in their supply chain to use their thing that are interested in it right now, which is now just removing our whole thing if we want to move towards decentralization and not have just these few actors who have tremendous sway.
Yeah.
One final thing on the partnerships topic as a whole, which you mentioned, Piers, but very briefly, is that while there's these long running partnerships around kind of building on Radix and the ecosystem and developing that, which is very front of mind with Alexandria and the game changer that is scrypto, there's other things that come into this. So as Piers mentioned, GoodFi, it has nearly 100 members now across the DeFi space. That's forging relationships and networks that may not immediately benefit Radix today, but are getting us involved in conversations, in planning, and in the thought space of the entire industry. And that feeds into other activities we're doing. So, for example, next week when we've got a booth and doing stuff at Web Summit, Web Summit may not necessarily be something that comes through immediately, but the laying the groundwork for those relationships, both with not necessarily direct enthusiast developers today, but industry people, media, and even more generalist developers going in the next kind of 2-3 years. It's creating that pipeline of multiple angles to grow Radix and the network as a whole. That's important and something we're doing day to day. But doing that correctly in a way that builds momentum over months and years to reach the point ultimately of decentralizing the entire global financial system takes time, and done well reinforces itself. If you try and rush that and have very artificial or light touch kind of announcements and nothing on it, it actually discredits that as you get to a stage where you do want to action them and build those partnerships in a more meaningful way.
Cool. Let's move on to the next question.
So this one is definitely in Russ's corner, which is, what's the current priorities for the tech teams? Is it all hands on deck for scrypto, or are some people working on Babylon and beyond?
So, I mean, the tech team is not monolithic. We have sub teams that have different areas of specialization. I can say, I mean, for what's top priority right now, the absolute top of mind at all times is scrypto, of course, which we have the preview event coming up, Alexandria previews on November 12th. A lot of work being done to make sure that's as good as it can possibly be. And then also on the API update, which is going extremely well. Designs all finalized, and we're in the process of implementation right now. And as far as, I mean, developing towards Babylon, that's always ongoing, right? We have the work on making the Olympia network as good as it can be, but also then how does that evolve into when do we bridge across to Radix Engine v2 and we can start doing scrypto on the ledger. But of course, that's always ongoing. That's the main focus of the core network team.
Yeah, I think it would be important to just say that scrypto is not, again, it's not like a completely separate thing. Like when building scrypto, when designing scrypto, it has to be designed from the point of view of like, how does that flow into the Radix Engine v2, and then how does that flow into consensus? And so like the whole process of designing the language was a process of various levels of abstraction of the system and working out how they flow into each other, at least at a high level, right?
And it's also beyond Babylon. We have to look for Xi'an as well. All these decisions we make, we go, okay, let's think through sharding for this. So even though that won't actually be required to ship at Babylon, we have to make sure that we haven't painted ourselves into a corner of, oh yeah, this will be inherently unshardable and we'll have to go redesign this. And God knows what we do with all the state on the ledger at that point when we have to move over. So there's always many threads going at once, and there's it's just very high touch, especially between the folks that are working on the current Olympian network, working on the Radix engine, and working on the scrypto language, to make sure that we always sanity check everything before we proceed with the design to make sure that we're not in trouble down the line.
Yeah, I think the approach we take with the teams is that we've got teams that are like, loosely speaking, are focused on a particular consumer of the product. So we have a builders team that's focused on what do we need to deliver to people that are going to be building stuff on the network. And we've got a network team that's built on like how do we build core infrastructure that's stable and decentralized and so forth. So Olympio is kind of the first big launch for the network team primarily, but all of these teams need to be thinking about what's the next deliverable for them. So, the Olympia network there's some of this we talked about in the last little talk that we had, Piers, but there is already thinking that went into Radix Engine V1 on Olympia, which is there because it's the direction that we know we need to go for Babylon when Radix Engine V2 goes to that network. And then it's kind of similarly on Alexandria, where Alexandria is very focused on building something for the simulator environment so that people can start working with the tools. But as Russ was saying, every step of that is making sure like, okay, here's what we need this is what a developer needs to be useful, but at least do the initial design thinking about like how would that be implemented on the public network, and then how would that be implemented on a sharded network down the road. So I think that's very much the character of it is like, we are not right now, we don't have a dedicated team that's cutting code on the Babylon network because it kind of that doesn't make sense. What we're doing is making sure that what we're building generally in the network team for Olympia is heading in the right direction, and making sure that what we're delivering with Alexandria is heading in the right direction, so that after Alexandria, when we do start really cutting code towards Babylon, we haven't paid ourselves a corner on these things. So it's like there's definitely a lot of Babylon work that's going on, but it's not as if you go to GitHub and you're going to see like a separate Babylon section of the GitHub project that's writing Babylon code, because it's that's when you get to the deep implementation phase. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about how we've moved from a discovery to implementation.
Yeah, and you can think of, Alexandria being running on a simulator. The purpose of that is so that after we've done our design and go, yeah, we can see how to implement this on Ledger now. We understand how it will work. We can now go extremely quickly to code on just a simulator, or we can just make our idea work instantly, which lets us prototype ideas very fast, lets us see how it actually feels, and then upcoming when the public has a crack at Scripto, so they can see how things are. And you could just expect it don't think of Alexandria as here's Scripto fully done. This is exactly the final implementation, exactly the final syntax. That's not the point of it. The reason what we want to do is get it in front of people with this simulator behind it, where we can adjust things very quickly. There's no dependency on supporting the old way of doing things if we completely change how the simulator stores state, for example. And we want to come to a good final implementation of Scripto with the community, because while we've been very diligent about eating our own dog food on this, we are not the full community. We're not the ones who are going to be writing production, dApps that go on Radix. We need the community to show us those things, and then we'll adjust based on what the feedback we get from them.
Very true. So that kind of goes into the next question, some of the stuff we spoke about here, which is with these different specific teams, are there teams focused on developing things like, say, a mobile wallet, for example?
Yeah, I'll talk about this one a little bit. So we do have a separate a team which is focused on user apps, and they've been this has been primarily focused on the current Olympia desktop wallet as well as the Explorer and some of those things. There's to be honest, what we're trying to do is particularly with user products, it's very easy to get drawn into this cycle of like you've got the first release and then you're refine, and the team can be very focused on making incremental improvements to that one product. But particularly with what we're doing, and we have a long roadmap towards something that's quite ambitious, we have to be very cautious to not get locked into refining when we need to be making a more substantial step forward. So I'm speaking at a very high level, but what I mean here is that we've mentioned this community, but I want to reemphasize it here, that we launched a Radix wallet with the Olympia network that was specifically for the Olympia network, that was focused on what you can do with Olympia, which was trade UEXRD for XRD tokens, receive those tokens, send them around, stake them to the network, and as well as create your own third-party tokens and send those things around. And so it was a wallet experience that was designed to do very specifically that. To be honest, we don't intend to continue to just refine that wallet as it is. We actually want to come to a point where we basically obsolete that wallet and we launch a new wallet experience entirely. Because when we get to particularly to Babylon and then onward to Xi'an, the nature of the Radix network is going to be quite different. It's going to become a platform for DeFi, which it isn't right now. Right now, we've built the foundations for building something that can support DeFi, but Babylon is where that starts to become real, where you can actually deploy dApps to the public network. And so that needs to have its own wallet experience. Like if you look at MetaMask, that has shown that a very particular wallet experience can be hugely enabling to that kind of ecosystem. So to get back to your question of mobile wallets, definitely see that there's a lot of interest in mobile wallets, and we definitely believe that a mobile experience of connecting to the Radix network is really important. But we don't honestly feel like it's important right now for the Olympia network, and we really want to focus all our efforts on what is the right mobile experience for the version of Radix that really supports DeFi, because this is where we want people being able to treat this as a new way of interacting with finance, and that includes a mobile experience. This includes, people can do banking on the go on their phone right now. Obviously, people are going to expect the same out of DeFi right now, and the mobile experiences for DeFi kind of suck right now. It's not really well thought out. So we're trying to put a lot of, I would say that we're in very, very early discovery right now in thinking about what does the combined desktop and mobile DeFi experience want to look like once we get out to Babylon and out to Xi'an, when we're really thinking of the network in terms of replacing traditional finance. Nothing to talk about right now. It's like, again, this is way ahead of actually cutting code or something like this. But what we want to do is allow ourselves as much of our resource time as we can to focus on solving that problem rather than spending a lot of resources on building a mobile wallet for the Olympia network right now. So, I realize that's a little bit disappointing. I'm not saying a mobile wallet wouldn't be nice for the current network. We'd love to have it, but it's an expensive use of our resources. And we think we can actually provide most of the benefit by working with third-party wallet providers
Right.
that can integrate Radix and do the kind of those simple token-oriented things right now. We think that's a
Yeah,
better way.
I was actually going to say that. And like the fact that we're not going to build a mobile wallet ourselves doesn't mean that a mobile wallet won't exist for Olympia. One of the things that needs to happen before that happens, though, is the new APIs. The new APIs need to come out before we can actually start getting third-party wallets involved. But like, actually, if you look at the statistics and the download usage, most layer ones, like high quality layer ones, haven't built their own mobile wallet. There's like one or two exceptions to that, and the ones that have built them, the usage is really low, and the ratings are really low, because of building a mobile wallet is actually a really difficult thing to do. Like it's a really big piece of software to deliver. It's not as simple as I think a lot of people take it for granted to be. And then the last part of that is that there are lots of decent third-party wallets who are integrating layer ones as part of their business model, and like as soon as the APIs are done, that's definitely something that we would love the community to engage with more. We'd love to sort of look at talking to third-party wallet providers to bring a mobile experience to Olympia. Like, it's not because we don't think it's important. We just think that there are people who already do it better that we could integrate with, and that there is going to be this very large shift to Babylon in how we expect people to interface with the network anyway.
And a lot of these have multiple moving parts as well. So using third-party wallets as an example, we are already and have already scoped out some of the things they need. So the API, for example, is something they need. But it's not just a case of, as soon as the API is done, they can integrate us immediately. If you look at Trust Wallet, for example, even their public details for integrating a new chain is 3 to 6 months of it being live, certain performance levels, certain usage levels. And all of this comes through growth. And it has to be a integration that makes sense for both sides. And this is where like a partnership pipeline comes through as well. Like, we're having those discussions already, but they don't necessarily happen overnight, because multiple things need to all be in place for it to occur. And this is all important to make this happen.
And we can focus on those ecosystem things without distracting the development team. It's like getting the mobile wallet. By doing that, it's like you get the mobile wallet, but these are all things that we want for the Radix ecosystem anyway. So we focus on doing that.
Right. And if you are a community member thinking about building a mobile wallet for the Radix network, we would love that. That would be awesome. And we will champion you if you bring it out and make sure you get plenty of attention. So like, please do, like once the new API is out and you're like, cool, I'd like to like try out building against the Radix platform, Radix stack. That would be awesome too. So like, don't like, we are not going to build one. Please build one, until Babylon. So like, please build one and get involved.
Cool. Any other points on that, or should we move on to the next question?
Let's do that.
So this is a big one. What can the community expect in the next kind of 3 to 6 months after the release of Alexandria and scrypto? And some of the ideas were like, will there be demos? Will there be dApps people can download to test in the simulator? Matt, do you want to kick off here? Because obviously you're doing a lot here with our new ecosystem lead.
I think I actually, I want to have Russ answer this to begin with.
Oh,
I
okay.
think he's got, yeah. Like,
Sure.
I think you've got a lot more visibility on the specifics of what you're going to be able to do.
Yeah, so 3 to 6 months immediately after Alexandria release is going to be all about, there's a few things that are going to happen. Number one is just showing examples of stuff implemented in scrypto. Of course, we will have public demos and that kind of thing. And my sincere hope is that even if you're just kind of a very casual developer, if you've done some scripting or something, or I don't know, maybe you use your VBA jockey in Excel or something like that, that scrypto will be understandable to you, that you will look at it and go, actually, I think I could write a dApp, right? I very much hope that that is the outcome, that it does not seem like, wow, this is some insurmountable hill I have to get up to start writing code. And the way we do that is by showing, hey, here's something implemented, here's how it works, documenting that, and then walking through. And then, of course, we'll have comparisons, for example, of, say, this is how it's implemented in Solidity, and here's how it's implemented here. That's certainly, you can expect to have plenty of that. And another thing that we're going to be focused on is, as we learned even internally, even if you're a consumer of a lot of things in the DeFi ecosystem and you think you know how it works, when you actually go to say, I'm going to now go write this in scrypto, like, let me go see if I can do a similar thing for, collateralized lending or something. Turns out you only know about 70% of how it works. And then you have to go do some research. You go, that's not at all what I expected. So we have some education to do in general on all these DeFi services that you recognize the names of and you're consuming. Here's how it actually functions under the hood. And here are the ways that you can do it with an asset-oriented approach, with resources. And here's how that changes. So there's, not only do we have to get that information out to the community, but we have to ourselves become better at naturally going to what's the pattern for scrypto for how we implement this kind of thing. And we're getting better at it. We're going to have to get much, much, much better at it in the months after Alexandria. And part of this is, of course, building the community of these enthusiast developers. And if you have ever been to if you ever ran a node in the beta or in mainnet now or on StokeNet, on Discord, the Node Runners channel is like the most fantastic community where somebody can come in knowing nothing. I've never run anything on a server before, and 4 people jump in to donate their time to help them get running. We need to replicate that fantastic community on the developer side, so that when people come to develop on scrypto, they go, this is great. It's like, I can't wait to go to a scrypto meetup with some of these people.
One of the things that we learned, sorry, go on, Matt.
I was just going to say, yeah, in fact, I to add to that a little bit, I think there's someone we just announced in our developer community channels that many people maybe haven't seen yet, but a guy named Jonathan, who's come on board, and he's our head of developer ecosystem. And so if you were talking about the 3 to 6 months after the release of scrypto, after Alexandria, Jonathan is really going to be coming to the fore in that period in putting together a lot of different developer programs. We want to start creating a structured developer program around Alexandria, and it's all focused on the community that Russell mentioned, that the idea that we need to build a place where people are building because because they love the tools, because they want to help other people, because they want to get involved early, and they're looking ahead to Babylon at how exciting this is going to be when it moves to the public network. It's that sort of community enthusiasm, I think, is our core advantage of what we're building, and building a tool that's really focused on giving people what they need, rather than saying like, well, okay, we've just dropped EVM on and we're going to throw a bunch of money at developer projects to get some thin partnerships announced on our webpage. Like, it's all about building community that can create organic growth, that can create real adoption, can create real momentum around Radix and the tools that we're building. And this is how we win the fight against other scalable platforms that are in the space for DeFi. So, we'll have more to talk about here as we get closer to Alexandria release, and then after Alexandria release, about what these programs are going to look like. But definitely, it's going to be all about helping and encouraging, and in fact, elevating members of our community as they start working with these tools in their earliest form, getting feedback for us so we make sure we're building exactly the right thing for Babylon, so that our community is as strong as possible, and our technology is as strong as possible when we do get to Babylon and things move on to the network.
One of the really interesting things that we learned about as we were doing all of the interviews with DeFi projects was that one of the biggest problems in the DeFi industry, in the crypto industry right now, is talent. Right? And like, Solidity developers are massively in demand, yet they are like, companies are offering ridiculous salaries to get Solidity developers. And every single DeFi project they were talking to was like, it's really hard to find good Solidity developers, ones that we can trust, ones that can actually deliver something that's safe and reliable and isn't going to get hacked. And that's because it's incredibly difficult to get up the curve on Solidity. Now, what I will say is that when you introduce a new language, there's still a long settling in period. Like, most languages take 2 to 4 years to start to get any kind of decent adoption, and that's even with very like enthusiastic communities. Now, in new technology areas, that can be a bit quicker because there isn't like an established way of building. But what I think is going to be really exciting about this sort of 3 to 6 month period is going to see how quickly people get up this curve. And so it's the start of demonstrating to projects that are thinking about building on Radix that, hey, like, you're going to get great talent here. This is actually really easy to do. Like, it's so easy that Russell keeps saying to me, you, Piers, you're going to be building scrypto applications, and I'm not even a developer. And he's like, nope, you're going to be able to do it. And that's really exciting to me. And one of the other things we found when we were interviewing developers, both in the traditional enterprise space, as well as those people in the DeFi space who hadn't yet started developing, who were developers but hadn't started yet developing Solidity, and we were like, why are you not building in this space? It's probably like 10 to 1 in terms of the numbers of people that we could find that were really excited about DeFi but hadn't yet started building versus people who are already building. Like, why is there all of this talent waiting on the sidelines? And it's because Solidity is insane. And so, like, I think that people don't really understand how many people are actually out there waiting to just get started. But that's going to be a slow starting process. So that 3 to 6 months, you're going to see people starting to get like their head around both DeFi as they come in from the traditional space and are excited by it being covered in Forbes and in the Wall Street Journal, and Goldman Sachs saying DeFi is the future. Oh, cool! I'm a finance developer. I want to get into this. But there's this whole set of things that you have to understand about DeFi that makes it like there's some learning processes there. And then there's all of these people in the DeFi community now who've tried building with Solidity and been like, man, this is actually really, really hard. And those are the people that I think that sort of 3 to 6 month run up is going to start to pull in, and that's going to be super exciting. And making sure that people have the ability to download each other's apps and run it in their simulator. That's going to be so cool to see what comes out of that.
A big part of this as well is
we basically want to get people. Sorry, we basically want to get people in that period after Alexandria launch to be building code and sharing that code, like showing what's possible, the tools as much as possible. Like, that's really kind of the focus of not just us doing demos, but we want everyone in the community building their own demos and showing what these tools are capable of. Sorry, Adam.
All I was going to say is that Alexandria as a launch is the beginning of building a developer ecosystem on Radix. It is the
Right.
start. It's the early access to trying scrypto, and the reason for that is not only to let people get their hands on it, start getting up that talent curve, seeing what an unfair advantage it is being able to build in Scrypto, but it's also to feedback on the product so we can improve it and we can add stuff. It's not like Scrypto comes out at the end of this year and we're like, cool, that's done, let's move on to something else. It's an evolving product that keeps growing. And when we do these things, we want to not only be the people sitting there saying, hey, the time to talent at Scrypto is great for developers, great for projects, because Adam says so or because Matt says so, but actually hearing people in the community, actual third parties go, hey, I built this and I had a really good time doing it. Look at this thing I made. I enjoyed it. It was a better experience for me. That has the network effects that really build growth momentum over a long period of time. And this is a concept which Piers and I have spoken about quite a lot, about the difference between building a great audience and building a great community are different things. And we need to build a community of developers, and that does take time. And even though percentage growth can be quite quick, you don't start seeing that until it really starts building up that flywheel. And
Right.
building that flywheel effectively can seem frustrating at the start because you feel like you're doing a lot to not get really quick results. But getting it successfully running really pays off with dividends in a much shorter time than people realize. And that's how we go from the enthusiasts to getting towards Babylon, where we're ready to launch an ecosystem. And if you try and shortcut that, you lead to more problems and more pain down the road of trying to adapt.
Right. Right. Judge not an ecosystem by at the start by the number, but the passion. Because I mean, one of my favorite stories that one of my friends who sort of co-founded TransferWise told me was about this, like they discovered that their NPS score, their Net Promoter Score, was their biggest influence in virality. And like, as long as they were hitting 8 or above, they were growing very quickly, and they were started from very small numbers, but like, it was just that focus on what was driving that. And here it's going to be the same things. Like, you know, you don't have people evangelizing around boring incremental languages. You have people evangelizing around things like Rust and Swift that fundamentally change how things are done. And Scrypto is that. It's a huge leap in how you build decentralized finance. And we're really excited to see how much people like just love this once they get their heads around it.
Russell was so excited about it, he had to jump off the call to go work on it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things when you look at this as well is the idea of Scrypto being this game-changing innovation is also a spark of innovation. Like, if people see this and go, wow, I wonder if I could build this using Scrypto, they then build something which then leads to an explosion of innovation off that. And that is the really exciting thing about building these things. And if you look at other markets, that's exactly what happened. Like, if you went back to the start of, say, something like YouTube and go, well, what would people be making videos of in 2021? They wouldn't have predicted it. They put a video up of the zoo. They're like, oh, we'll do this. You wouldn't think that there'd be people doing like live streams of them eating meals because they want to do it with friends, or tutorials, or like playing video games, who knows, whatever. Like, there's all these different things that can come off this one simple innovation and idea that has huge effects at the next order of magnitude. And that's about building an effective community. Us talking to one person is one-to-one. If everyone we speak to goes and speaks to 3 other people and says how great of a time they had building on Radix, or the Radix dev community was really helpful or useful, or there was all these other things, that has orders of magnitude gains in only a couple of jumps. And that's the kind of ecosystem which we need to build strategically to win the overall play, which is to have all of finance move over to DeFi and beyond, rather than just today's initial battle.
Right. And importantly, like, you don't get that by paying people to be there. Like, the perverse incentive is really strong. And like, a lot of people think that you can shortcut this stuff by just going, oh, we'll just pay a bunch of developers to build here. And it doesn't work. Like, there was this great thing about like a study on blood donation by the Red Cross, where they started paying people. They were like, right, how do we get more people to donate blood? All right, what we're going to do is we're going to pay people to donate blood. And the number of people who donated blood went down because it changed the incentive of why you were there. Like, you donate blood because you want to help, but like being paid cheapens the transaction. And with a lot of like improvement of self, growth of self, it's about learning, it's about development. It's like, I'm interested in learning DeFi because I find it interesting, because I find it exciting. I want to play with this language because it's intuitive and fun. I'm not here because you're paying me to. And like, oftentimes your best developers, you can't pay them enough to be there because their time is so precious. They're giving their evenings and weekends to grow themselves because they want to be better. They're not there for a check. They're there because they care about being better. They care about understanding the new thing, and it's so important to capture that. And you can break it so easily by creating bad incentives, by like people just coming in and being like, where's my $50, where's my $100, where's my $200, and that's all you see in the channel, not actually talking about, oh, I built this really cool thing, check this out. So like, shortcuts in this can actually be completely work against you. That's not to say we don't think there's ways in which you can increase the velocity and the virality of something, but you've got to be really careful about how you think building those incentives. And it's not just going, let's throw money at people.
Just to be clear, you don't need to donate blood though. Blood sacrifice is not required.
That would be a great like sort of like bar. You only get in if you've donated blood. You don't have to do that. It's not happening.
So on that note, speaking of what people can expect, like we've spoken a lot about kind of future term and beyond long-term map. Let's bring it closer to home, because obviously a lot of our focus on the moment is Alexandria. So one of the questions is, what can developers expect in the lead up to Alexandria release at the end of this year?
Yeah, so I mean, as we've just been talking about, Alexandria is intended to be our earliest form of scrypto that we think is has legs going forward. Like, we think this is going to give you your first taste of what it's like to work with scrypto. It's going to be developed, it's going to be improved on, it's going to be added to as we move to Babylon. So the lead up to that, I mean, to be honest, we're putting a lot of work in. Like, Alexandria is already basically the earliest form that we want to really put in front of the developer community. However, we do have, I think the major milestone ahead of that is we're doing the Alexandria preview event in New York, which people can come in person, or they can dial in remotely. We're doing this in the middle of November, and it's going to be kind of a sneak peek on what we're doing in Alexandria. There will be, some things that are going in Alexandria that won't have ready yet, but it'll be like the first place you can get started on understanding, beyond like the blogs we've been putting out about kind of characteristically, this is what Radix Engine, this is what Scrypto is about. Like, at that event, we're going to be talking about details of like, this is what Scrypto code actually looks like. We'll have some examples. We'll be showing people what this experience is going to look like. And then we're also, the keynote is also going to be talking about where we're going strategically, like why Alexandria is so important and how that leads into Babylon and Xi'an. And how we get from where we are today to being a platform that can serve global finance. So we're going to be over the next, by the end of the year when we announce Alexandria, I think what we're going to be doing primarily is starting to announce some of the things that will be coming in the new year once we have Alexandria. We're going to have the preview event, which will give you an idea of what's coming. We're going to be talking about the first steps of the developer program. This is going to feed very much into like what we talked about. Like, Alexandria is all about community. It's all about elevating people that are contributing that community. So that's going to be the focus of our developer program, is getting people involved and making sure they're supported in building what they want to build, and contributing code back to the community and interacting with the community and showing what's possible with these tools, as well as giving us the feedback we need to make sure that we're building the right thing. So we'll be announcing some of those things in the lead up to Alexandria, but for the most part, we're kind of in heads down mode on making sure that we've got Alexandria in a form that's going to be interesting for the first developers to launch, and as well, Jonathan's going to be putting a lot of work in on those developer programs that we're going to be announcing around that time frame.
Yeah, you can think that prior to release, you'll get here's what ships in the box, so to speak. That these
Mm.
are the things that we have at least an implementation of and want you to start using. And then a summary of the things that we think are highest priority for us to either bring new capability to Scripto, or maybe we're, slightly unhappy with the way something's implemented and we want to refactor it. But that list of gaps, you can think of it as, we're going to publish what we think, but that will change based on what the community says is the most important thing. Or if somebody goes to implement some new product and goes, hey, how can I achieve this? And we say, you can't yet achieve that in Scripto, but that would be really cool. That might become our top priority. I mean, this is the whole point, is to establish this cycle of what's the most important next thing to address in Scripto, so that by the time we get to Babylon, that Scripto is as good as it can possibly be, and we feel it meets all the use cases that it needs to.
Just to be clear, Ross, that mean it's additional things. So if someone goes and builds something in the Alexandria release, will that be deployable in Babylon as code?
I suspect that by the time we get to Babylon, there'll have been some minor syntax change or something. But the point we're always keeping internally is, if you start coding at Alexandria, all your experience should apply for Babylon. So, which is not to say if you wrote something, day one of Alexandria release, that you could literally compile that for Babylon. But I'm expecting that would be very minor bit of work to get it compiling for Babylon at that point. We want it to be. So you could start building now and feel confident we're not going to completely change the way something works, and that all your experience is useless now.
Yeah, the asset oriented approach of doing things is not going to change, and the core features of building things in that way this is the foundation of what we're delivering in Alexandria. So we expect that people are going to be demonstrating, here's how you build an automated market maker in the asset oriented approach, here's how you build a lending platform in the asset oriented approach. And we definitely expect the people that get involved in the community and build those things are going to be the first people that are going to be able to deploy those things at Babylon into the blueprint catalog, onto the network, make them useful, because they will have come up that hopefully short learning curve, but learning curve nonetheless, to figure out, like, this is the new better way of building DeFi, and they'll be the first in line to take advantage of that when it goes onto the public network.
And this will be easier to understand once the public can see Scripto, but
yeah.
The learning curve is not about, I have to learn this new, it's not about language learning. It's not, don't think of it being, the syntax is very tricky. It's just thinking in a resource oriented way, in an asset oriented way. It's, because we did this a lot in our internal discussions of, okay, how would we implement the following type of product? And it's like we'd get nowhere for a couple of hours talking back and forth. And then suddenly somebody thinks of a clever way to use a resource for this. And it's like the tops of your heads open up and you go, oh, now we all see instantly how to build this. We don't even have to go writing to implementation, because as soon as we have the concept of how you would do it by moving resources around rather than just to this monolithic smart contract, everything else is easy at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You can go a long ways from a thought experiment in Scripto rather than worrying about the minutia of how can I safely implement it. It's like once you have the concept in your head, you're pretty much, the hard work's done.
It's like it'll be really nice when we can make this concrete, because we talk about these things and people go, well, it's like you can't really get serious about it until you can look at the code and see the result of what we're talking about. So, like, basically that's why we're doing the ape event in November. It's sort of like, we just want to get this in front of people in an early form, even before Alexandria release, so we can start getting that feedback, and so we can talk about this in more concrete terms. But we wanted to do that, and we wanted to make it a little bit special, not just kind of go like, hey, here's a document that shows Scripto syntax. It's like we wanted to be able to explain to people that philosophy and the things that we've learned about what we've been building.
Awesome. So wrapping up on our final question, now going a bit beyond that, one of the things the community is asking is like, and I think is really interesting to understand for people who don't see it internally, is obviously with Alexandria as our next release, what is the process for when we start planning out, say, Babylon and beyond? Like, how do we approach that internally from a product and a tech perspective and strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is one I really would like to talk about, because it gets right to the philosophy of product development that we're taking, and I think it's the right process of product development, in that I've talked about this someplace else, I forget where, but we're taking this idea of every product should go through. You shouldn't go directly from like, okay, we're sitting down and we're writing a bunch of code, or it shouldn't just be a process of going like, okay, market is saying they want X, let's build X as quickly as possible. What you need to do is go through a process of product discovery and then implementation and then delivery. And we make those steps pretty explicit, and there's gray area. I mean, they flow into each other, but we're taking this approach with everything we're building. We went through this process with Olympia. That was our first deliverable, and then we're flowing this into the approach we're taking with Alexandria and then Babylon and Xi'an. And the notion here is that you should start off with this product of discovery. This is really important, and this is like probably the most important thing to do correctly in terms of making sure that you're building something that's going to achieve what you're trying to get to long term. Like particularly when you have a really ambitious objective like we do, the discovery has to be done really well. And the idea of discovery is you are as quickly as possible coming to an idea of understanding what we can build, why it's important, and who that user is behind it. Like making sure that if we deliver something like this, will this user, will they really experience the benefit that we think it'll give to them? And you can do that in most cases without writing any code at all, or without really implementing very much beyond just like simple prototypes. And it's this process of doing a lot of testing. It's this idea, because you are never going to get it right. You're never going to go just sit down and go like, I know exactly what the market wants and I'm going to build it the first time and it's going to be perfect. That's never the way it is. What you need to do is test theories. You need to say, we believe that this is a problem that the market has experienced. Like developers, for example, this goes back to our approach on Alexandria. For Alexandria, the first questions we were asking ourselves were, what are the problems people are really experiencing with Solidity? Like we sensed that there was a problem there, that people were, Andre Cronje was talking about how building in DeFi sucks today. Like you don't say something like that casually. And we could see all these hacks that were happening. Like there's a problem here. What is this really about? And so we developed some theories about that. It's sort of like, well, we think these aspects of the tools aren't good enough, and we think these types of solutions would help address those things. And so this is going back even, more than a year, like more than a year and a half.
18 months. So I think it's over 18 months, like yeah, almost 2 years.
Yep.
We started this process of testing this out, of starting by testing it internally, kind of going like, if we could build something like this that would have these features, would that then feel better? Would you feel more confident you could build a smart contract that wasn't going to be hacked? Or would you feel like you could get from an idea to delivery in a way that felt much more natural and easy? And it was that easiness, even sort of the most important problem to solve. And so we went through multiple iterations of this internally, and then going back to, I guess beginning of this year, we started doing very selective tests of, without writing any of the back end code, just sort of saying, we think we could build a scrypto that would look like this. How does this feel? And we tested this with real developers and got a feel for like what was really playing and what wasn't. What parts of this man, that's really, if you could build that would be fantastic. I would feel so much better. But this thing over here, it's like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but maybe that's important down the road, but it's not really on my mind right now. And actually, this is where we discovered some of these things that Piers was mentioning about, like, it's like, yeah, these tools seem really cool, but actually the thing that's bugging me is I can't hire Solidity developers. Oh, really? Well, why is that? Well, because it takes forever for developers to come up. There's lots of Solidity developers, but actually only the ones that have been in it for 3 years are the ones that really know enough to be able to build. Oh, really? Well, why is that? So we kind of, dug into these things, and that started informing what we were building with the tools, of making sure that we were building something that was really, really focused on solving those important problems that were truly holding DeFi back. So anyway, I'm getting very specific about Alexandria, but to step back to it, this is the process that we're taking with everything. We've gone through this discovery process with Alexandria. We're feeling very, very good now about what we're building with Alexandria. That kind of like our 90% vision of what this needs to be to really be valuable is something that we're now implementing to. And so now we've moved into this phase where we're cutting lots of code. We've got this in our GitHub repo. Once we get to Alexandria, that repo is going to open up. You'll be able to see this code more openly. But this is where we're pretty deep into the implementation of delivering the first form of Radix Engine v2 and scrypto that will be released at Alexandria. Then meanwhile, we're on the implementation, or we're on the discovery phase for Babylon. So we have a pretty good idea. We have a pretty good theory about where we're going with Babylon. We feel like, okay, once we have these tools, we believe that like we got to have a system of being able to incentivize developers with this royalty system, and people need to be able to discover things through that royalty system. And like these are the things that, like even gets to things like Instapass and Instabridge, where we believe that there are these additional services that we need to help solve the problems that developers are going to experience, so they can get from a great idea to something that's really useful to people as quickly as possible. We have some really strong theories about this, and we've been testing these theories, and we have, and we're laying the groundwork for technology that can achieve these things, but we have more discovery to do on it still. We're going to, basically, once we deliver Alexandria, this is where the clock kind of ticks over. This is where more of our resources start flowing into, okay, now we're starting to cut code on Babylon because we've gotten through enough on implementation. Now Alexandria has gone into delivery, where now we have something out there. We're going to be continually improving it, but with the core implementation has been finished. Now we're moving into core implementation of Babylon, whereas we then, once we get closer to the Babylon release, now we start doing discovery on what Xi'an really needs to be. So there's this rolling, overlapping process of making sure that while we're implementing one thing, we're doing very careful, tested discovery on the next thing that's come after that, at the same time that we're providing support and we're incrementally improving the thing that we delivered previously. So this is why, for example, this is why we talk about how we really don't want to talk about delivery dates for Babylon until we get Alexandria out, because right now, even though we feel like we're coming to the point where we have a pretty darn good idea of what Babylon looks like, we're not done yet. We need to do more work, and we need to start really sitting down and going, okay, based on what we have tested, after we deliver Alexandria, now we sit down and we start writing some code, and we start really thinking through what does it take to deliver something that's going to make Babylon really hit the objectives we need. And once we get through the first stages of that, that's when we can start saying, okay, now we have a pretty good idea of when we can deliver Babylon and what the feature list is going to be and all that kind of stuff. So very shortly here, we're going to be talking about our delivery date for Alexandria. This isn't going to be surprising. We've said by the end of this year. We're still on track for that. Connect the dots. But once we announce that one, after we deliver Alexandria, now more of the resources are going to start transitioning into implementation on Babylon. I think what we can say right now about Babylon is, based on the scope of what we understand of what Babylon needs to accomplish, it's almost certainly going to be towards the end of next year when we think that's going to be achievable for us to deliver that for Babylon. It's a pretty ambitious scope. There's a lot there. There's a huge amount of work that needs to go into taking what we've built with Alexandria and mating that up to the public network. We've laid the groundwork for that. We understand the outlines of what that looks like, but there's a huge amount of detail that goes into this. It was the same thing of getting from concept of Olympia to actually delivering Olympia. There's just an enormous amount of detail, and all that stuff has to be done very, very well and reliably and thought through very carefully. So we believe that all the things that we need to deliver for Babylon, it's almost certainly going to be towards the end of this year, or towards the end of next year we can deliver that. But we won't really be able to say more concretely until we get through some of that initial implementation work in the new year. Let's say, after a quarter or something of us working on Babylon, we'll be able to say, okay, now we can tell you this is what Babylon is going to be in high likelihood, and when we think we can deliver that. So, we obviously want that to be as soon as possible, because this is where things really get exciting in terms of having smart contract functionality on the network, but we have to do it right. We have to have this be in a form where developers come in and have the right experience right out of the gate. When someone's saying, like, these are going to be people that are going to be making a business decision. They're going to be saying, okay, you're telling me that I can now write code and I can deploy it on your network and I can launch a DeFi application. We have to make sure that story really works end to end, because if a developer gets halfway through that and they go, you said this was ready, but actually you're saying there's this critical feature that isn't ready yet, or this part of like the wall experience doesn't make sense in here, or whatever it is, if the complete picture, if it doesn't add up, then we can really burn developer goodwill very, very quickly. We can have developers that say, yeah, they said Babylon was ready for DeFi, but it's not actually ready. I'm just, these guys they're all hype, and I'm just going to go look somewhere else. We have to make sure it's right, and that's why Babylon is going to be a very, very substantial delivery for us.
Just to add to that process as well, is it's not a pure tech process either. So a big part of when we're looking at scoping out what we're doing in Alexandria, between Alexandria and Babylon, etc. It's a multi-team input, because what we're delivering there is,
Absolutely.
how does the marketing fit in? How does legal compliance, support, community, how do all of these pieces come together? What resources are we going to need both to deliver it and then support it afterwards and make sure that it's a success? And
Hmm.
often that involves looking at these different potential features on a very long initial list of going, these are all the things that everyone goes, hey, that'd be a cool thing to have. But then we actually have to take a business and kind of network strategic view of this and going, well, what can we deliver? Which of those things will benefit from having other parts included in there? Which things maybe could come in a later release or be added in later and aren't critical for the success of this? And what do we need to make sure that those things are successful and provide what the end users and developers actually want from it? And
Right.
that process is a really tough one. And we learn stuff as we go along. And without giving specific examples, because it would ruin the fun of when we do it, we tease little bits and little ideas in ways which we don't draw big attention to. It could be Piers on an interview, it could be on a blog post, it could even be on a tweet or a comment in Telegram. We might just have a little thread and we see how much people pick up on it. If it spurs a certain idea, that can give us valuable feedback into what is attracting either attention or desire or solving a pain point, to modify that thinking as we go to implement it and scope it out more accurately over the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it even gets into hiring. Like, for example, right now we are extremely aggressively hiring. We are trying to get in a very large number of developer resources. And so, we also need to see some of the results of that hiring before we can say very concrete things about, like, when, even if we have a very clear idea of this is the scope that needs to be delivered, then making commitments about when we can deliver that really depends on, like, how quickly can we get the resources that we need in there, and what level of people do we get in? Are they people that are going to be able to, rip this out in a month, or are these people, or do we need to provide more time for it? Like, we kind of need to onboard people and go through that whole process. So anyway, yeah, we'll know a lot more about Babylon in the months after Alexandria release, and then we'll do the same thing when we get to Xi'an. Like, we're going to be thinking ahead about it, and then once we do deliver Babylon, then we're going to start getting a much more concrete idea of what Xi'an can look like and when that can be delivered. And all of it needs to be informed by what's the most impactful thing we can do to make the Radix platform successful. And in a way, really the more direct thing is making people that are building on the Radix platform successful. Like, there's a million things we can do, but our main focus is always on making sure that we can make people that want to use the platform and build great things in DeFi successful. What's the most effective thing we can do for them? And then we follow that with the second and third and fourth priorities of what we can do for them.
I just to add to this, a couple of things. The first is that all of this is multifaceted, and we believe what we built with Scrypto is completely revolutionary, completely game changing for the industry. And so you got to bet your bottom dollar that we're going to be shouting about it. But that shouting process is going to be based on things that we can demonstrate that people are doing within our ecosystem, and that's going to be building a steady crescendo towards Babylon, because Babylon is just going to be such an incredible point in the Radix ecosystem's life. The other thing I'm going to say is that a lot of people are I think some people might be worried about sort of that time delay between the release of Scrypto and the release of Babylon. I am not worried at all, and the reason I'm not worried at all is because Scrypto is not just a language, and I think that as people read more about this, they're going to understand. But Scrypto is empowered by the Radix Engine v2, and it's a big, like, the Radix Engine v2 is where the power comes from. And then Scrypto is the way in which you access that power. But if you don't have the Radix Engine v2, then you don't have the power. And then the Radix Engine v2 is built entirely around our specific implementation of consensus, which is a cross-shard consensus, which is built around our revolutionary breakthrough consensus algorithm, Cerberus. And like, there is no way that a project like Ethereum can arbitrarily just pick up what we've built from Scrypto to the Radix Engine v2 to consensus, down. Like that entire stack is optimized very tightly for what we've done, and the way we've optimized it is for DeFi. And what we've ended up doing is not just creating this incredibly effective way of building, we've actually like massively increased performance as well. Like if you want sort of like comparison step ups, it's like going from, you know, sort of a 2 generations ago Intel chip to sort of the new Apple Silicon M1 Max. Like it's fundamentally a very integrated approach that is achieving incredible performance, even given just like the throughput of Olympia. Even giving the throughput of Olympia, the performance difference in DeFi on Radix versus Solidity is absolutely mind blowing, and that advantage is not going to be easily sort of copied. And quite honestly, we've got this period that we've got to build a developer ecosystem around this new language. It's going to take a bit of time, and no project is going to look at that, you know, this new language and go, oh, we're going to do that immediately. They're going to wait and see. So there's a long period that we've got to take full advantage and properly capitalize on the scrypto language and the launch of the Babylon ecosystem. So don't worry about that. That's going to be a really important process of building the ecosystem in the first place and making sure Babylon's as successful as possible.
And the market window is just barely opening as well. This is something we've been talking about, but like the size of DeFi today compared with the market opportunity is
right.
It's like it's a 100,000th of the total opportunity that's available.
Right.
And same thing for developers. Like we want to win existing crypto developers to scrypto, and we've been doing some testing, and like the response is very good. It's like, wow, I wish this had been around when I picked up Solidity to begin with, because this would have been way nicer. But even looking outside that, the number of developers out in the world that we believe should be coming to DeFi, they should be saying like, this is the big opportunity for developers.
Right.
This is the big gold rush. The number of developers that are non-crypto developers that either haven't even thought about this, or maybe they looked at Solidity and were like, no, I don't want to get started with that. Like that number of developers is so much bigger than the number of developers that are in crypto today.
Right.
So it's like the market window is just beginning to open. It's not going to close in the next years. And so this is why we need to be focused on always making sure that we're building the right thing, rather than like, we got to push out something that's like, well, it's not good enough, but it'll allow us to hit this market window for like the next like bull cycle. Like, you know, we'd like to do that kind of thing, but we can't do that at the expense of building the right thing that we really need for the long-term success of the platform. This is where we win.
And
the other thing I'll say about Babylon is Alexandria is a completely developer-focused release. It's completely about bootstrapping that community. The thing we haven't talked a great deal about is the user experience for Babylon is paramount for us as well. And so we've done the complete in the way that the iPhone was created from the blank sheet of paper style of design. That's what we've done with the user experience for Babylon, just fed into everything else. And right now, the crypto space is very much, you would never think of getting your non-technical friend to try to get into crypto unless they have some just incredible trust in you or some incredibly high risk tolerance. In fact, anybody who's in crypto now, by definition, has a pretty high risk tolerance with the way the tooling is now. So that all new end user experience, thinking about how should it work, not just how can you make it a little better than how it works today, I think will also be a huge part of why, even if it's the window to capture that non-technical person, it's like we haven't even gotten to the front of that window yet. Nobody has any tooling yet that makes crypto a fun, friendly experience. And just the thought of when I try to explain to a friend, by the way, here's how you secure this thing called a private key. It's like, I'm embarrassed to be telling them this. I'm embarrassed to be saying, yeah, you should split these things and get 2 safe deposit boxes. It's like, no one's going to do this. There's a very small community that will do that. So addressing those user experience problems is a huge part of Babylon. And that's part of the stuff that we've already started discovery on, and we're going through some of our great ideas. But that's part of how we can't get to, and it'll take this long to implement, because for a lot of the user experience, we have ideas of what we'd like to implement, but we're not through the discovery phase yet.
Yep.
Right. long-term bullish. It's super exciting what we're doing, and the vision is starting to come together. So yeah, really excited.
I always just want to animate or put something together to really symbolize just how big $300 billion is. Like,
I know, it's like, do you remember the beginning of the movie Contact, where they start at this person and they like zoom out through orders of magnitude until you get to galaxies? Like, we need like this powers of 10 thing for DeFi. It's like it's tiny right now, and then you zoom
Right.
out, you can see.
And that is what's so exciting, is that seems like a long way off, but it will happen so much quicker than you can imagine. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I remember a few years ago when it was like, oh, it's 10 years since the iPhone came out. And you look back and you're like, you simultaneously like, oh, that's really recent, but also it seems like so long ago. And how did we go from an iPhone being something that people would be like, wow, this is revolutionary, to everyone having a smartphone pretty much? Is that it? That adoption curve is a hockey stick, and people think we're seeing a hockey stick in DeFi now, and it's barely a blip. And that is, when you look at scrypto and you look at what Radix is building, is such a game changer to all of this, and unlocks not just direct innovation, but the innovation triggers this kind of exponential growth of more stuff that can be done off the back of that. That is what is fascinating and exciting, and why everyone at Radix wants to get up and build this, because our view is it is not going to just revolutionize DeFi, it will change the world. And the way you do that is by building it right, in a way that grows and gets momentum and reinforces the success that it builds upon, not just trying to get a quick win in the next month or two. And while those months can seem like a long time, when you get to 3 years down the road and look back, you're like, holy moly, that's a heck of a way we've come. And that is the exciting bit. And just keeping sight of that and seeing this progress along the way, it's a really, really bright future.
Quite true.
Also, it makes our job hard. I had an interview a little while ago about this, where someone said, like, oh, you're talking about crypto and it's all this innovative stuff, and like you're excited, but you're holding back. And it's like, yeah, because I know all the stuff we're thinking of, like the discovery stuff we're doing now. Like, we want to. I wish I could talk about it. Matt would probably literally come and hunt me down and beat me with a stick. But like,
He would.
It's so exciting, and that's we want to get it out, but it's a process.
Yeah, this is just the start.
And it's like, it's stuff that's like, you know, we'll talk about exciting stuff, and then next week it's different. It's totally different, because this is the, like, we found something that's even more exciting, or we found like, oh, actually, after this thing that we thought was exciting, and maybe if we'd mentioned something about this to the community, they'd be like, oh my god, that's amazing, you have to do that. And then we find out, actually, in the end, people don't find that interesting. Like, it seems cool on the surface, but it ends up being not really the primary problem to solve. So like, it's, you know, we test out a lot of interesting stuff, and sometimes we have to give up on ideas that we might have fallen in love with, because it's like, wow, I would love this, but it turns out it's like, no, that's actually just you. Like, most people don't care about it. Like, I've learned that many times in my career, where I've gotten into product developments where like I fell in love with the product, but actually, like, I'm an outlier case. I wasn't the target user. You have to just go out and make sure that what you're building is going to have the scale of impact you want.
Awesome. I think we should bring it to a close. It's been such a wonderful roundtable again. I think there's some great topics and some really interesting questions from the community. Please do keep asking questions that you want to see put forwards the next roundtable. And yeah, Matt, Russell, Adam, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay,
thanks, guys.
Bye.